Thank you to everyone who has spared their time this morning to come and listen to me. As Pauline just said, my name is Eric Murangwa Eugene. I am originally from Rwanda, but I've been living in the UK for the last 24 years, I think. I am a survivor of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. This morning was invited to come and talk to you about the lessons from Rwanda, the story of Rwanda, as part of the International Genocide Prevention Day, which is what we're marking today for the 73rd times. So I'm going to divide my talk into 3 or 4 parts. So I will start with the historical background of Rwanda to help you understand how the problems that caused the genocide came about, and then I will tell you what happened during those 100 days of genocide, and I'll also talk about how my personal life connects to that, and then I will tell you about Rwanda today. So if the technician can help us bring up the slide, go to the second slide. The next one. Yeah, thank you. So Rwanda it was a country that have been in existence for thousands of years. For centuries, Rwanda existed as a centralized monarchy and a succession of kings. And these kings came from a particular group of Rwandans who were known as Tutsis. The king was a supreme, but the rest of the population, Batutsi, Bahutu, and Batwa, lived in symbiotic harmony. In ancient Rwanda, Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa were considered to be social classes, not tribes, as many people have come to believe. You were Hutu or Tutsi or Twa because of what you were doing in your everyday life. Tutsis were considered as upper class because they owned cows, and cows were a symbol of wealth in the ancient Rwanda. And the Hutus were pretty much considered as a working class because they were interested in farming the land of Rwanda. And the Twa, they were more or less at the bottom end of Rwandan society classes because they were only interested in hunting and crafting, things that were not, excuse me, very much in the life of everyday Rwandan of that time. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So around 1895, Rwanda became a colony of the German, and the German established what you would call indirect rule. They came and find a very organized and to some extent sophisticated system of governance in Rwanda, because the king had managed to put in place a centralized system where he had chiefs in a different part of the country, but everything was controlled and managed from the king's palace. This was very different if you look at how many other African countries were organized at the time, because most countries were divided in the tribes, in the regionalism, and each and every part had pretty much its independent way of doing what they were doing. But in Rwanda, the system was very much centralized. So the German, when they found that, they didn't want to interrupt with that. They just get on with what they found there. But then after the First World War, Germany lost its power or its influence, and Rwanda was handed over to Belgium. Belgium at the time was already colonizing and Congo, which is a neighbor to Rwanda. So when Belgians took control around 1916, I think, they came with a different approach, and they wanted to disrupt the system that they found in Rwanda, because they thought it would not be easier for them to pretty much, control Rwandans under the system they found in place. So they set out to create theories of how these three groups of Rwandans are different, that they came from different parts of the world, that they had a different capacity of intelligence, that they had completely different way of life. So they favored the ruling Tutsi group, obviously, and then worked hand in hand with them, and with the theories that they were putting in place. They were also making the Tutsis believing that they are special people. They are different from the rest of Rwandans. They then came up with these kind of theories of how Tutsis may have come as far as Europe, possibly the north of Africa, and possibly beyond the African continent border. They then come up with some fake scientific findings. They measured the height of Rwandans. They measured the size of their heads. They measured the length of their nose, just to make sure that they were able to, make Rwandans believe that they were different. So when they introduced schools and the modern school, the modern education, which was at the time controlled by a Catholic Church, they only allowed the Tutsi children to attend that system of education, saying that Tutsis were more, capable to adapt to this new system from Europe, based on those theories that they had been putting in place, saying that Tutsis are more smarter than the Hutus. So the system of segregation and division really started, taking place through that introduction of discrimination through education. They introduced ID card in 1932, and this ID card had the usual, personal, individual details, but it also included which ethnicity you belong to. So they had already managed to divide the Rwandans in those three groups based on these shady scientific theories. So because after measuring people, they would say, if you are above 1.60 meters, it means you are Tutsi. If your nose is pointy, it means you are Tutsi. If your nose is a bit bigger, then you are Hutu. These kind of things, which really didn't make sense at the time. So Rwandans started somehow believing that they were different. Excuse me. And by 1950s, most of African countries were calling for independence, and so was Rwanda. So you can guess who were the forefront of calling for that independence. They were Tutsis, because they're the ones who had been given the privilege to go to school. They are the ones who understood the importance of being independent. So they started calling for independence, but that didn't go down well with the Belgians, who then turned around and find a way of manipulating some other Rwandans, a few young Hutus who had managed also to be given the privilege to go to school, either because they have any links with the masters. Maybe their parents may have been, serving in one of the Belgians leaders' homes, or they were involved in a church. So these few young Hutu people who had been managed to somehow infiltrate that system became a very key part of how the Belgian somehow changed the course of Rwandan independence movement. So in 1959, the first trouble really began when a new political party was established called MDR, or Mouvement Democratique Républicain, or Republic Democratic Movement. And they also added Parime Hutu on that acronym, saying that it was a party basically to fight for the emancipation of Hutu people. So for the first time in the history of Rwanda, there was a system that was not working for all Rwandans, but for one particular group of Rwandans. During the monarchy time, there is no anywhere in the history of Rwanda where the monarchy may have defended the interest of Tutsis only, even though most of the kings came from the Tutsi group, but they always worked for the interest of Rwandans, not for one particular group of Rwandans. But this political party came specifically defending the interest of Tutsi, Hutus. And then there were other political parties that pretty much followed the same route. And the first killings took place during that time in 1959, where more than 20,000 Tutsis were killed, and between 59 and 63, over 200 close to 300,000 Tutsis were forced out of the country. And this was pretty much something driven by the Belgians who have decided to get rid of the monarchy and then somehow try and keep controlling Rwanda, even though Rwanda was now going to be independent. So Rwanda became independent in 1962. And the first president, can we go to the next slide, please? Yes, the first president became a gentleman called Gregoire Kayibanda, who was a Hutu extremist, and he had been very close to the Catholic Church, because at the time he was the editor of the only Rwandan newspaper at the time called the Kinyamateka, which was owned by the church. So he became the president and went on to rule the country between 62 and 73. During his time, he marginalized Tutsis in every sense of imagination. He completely refused the return of those who had fled the country, and he also put in place some rules and measures that meant those who remained the country became pretty much second-class individuals. During that time, it was very hard for Tutsi young people, for example, to access higher education. Most people had to be fired from the government jobs that they were doing at the time, and the mistreatment continued in different parts of the country. The Tutsis who fled the country tried to return by force, but they were met with the strong resistance, mainly supported by the Belgian soldiers who had come to support the new regime in the country. So this went on until 1973, when Gregoire Kayibanda was overthrown by his defense minister, who was and also a Hutu, but from different parts of the country. Kayibanda was from the south of the country, and Habyarimana, who overthrew Kayibanda, he came from the north of the country. So Habyarimana, when he took power, he claimed to be more sympathetic to Tutsis, but this turned out not to be the case, because after a few years in power, he pretty much continued the same policies that Kayibanda have had in the last 10 years. So can we go to the next slide, please? So the Tutsis who had been forced out of their homeland from 59 to 73 had been asking to come back home, and they were completely refused. To one point, President Habyarimana said that Rwanda is like a glass of water. So if a glass of water is filled with water, you cannot add any more. If you add any more water, then it risks to spill what is already inside. So he was saying that Rwanda is a very small country. It cannot accommodate all Rwandans. So those who had fled should stay wherever they went. So this happened throughout that particular period of 59 and 94 and 90. So by 1990, the Rwandan community in exile have managed to equip themselves with different skills in a political and policies and also military, and then formed a new movement that they called the Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF. And they decided to return home by force. Most of the people who were in the RPF, particularly those who were in their military wing, known as RPA, or Rwandan Patriotic Army, had gained the military skills through different wars that took place in the neighboring countries, particularly Uganda, where the majority of Rwandans had fled to. So they somehow found themselves involved in the internal struggle that were taking place in Uganda in the 70s, 80s, and that allowed them to develop the military skills that they later on used to form their military movement. And on October 1st, 1990, they decided to attack Rwanda, wanting to force the government in place at the time to accept the return of the refugees, but also to open the political space and allow other people to be involved. At the time, Rwanda was ruled under one political party system. So the RPF turned out to be very skillful on military side and political side and the international diplomacy. And by 1992, they had managed to really put pressure on the Rwandan government, and the Rwandan government had to accept to negotiate with them. They had already captured quite a big part of Rwanda in the north part of the country. And the international community had also understood their demands, and then they put the Rwandan government under pressure to accept that. So in 1993, the negotiation, in 1992, they started negotiating what was known as Arusha Peace Accord. So it was a peace deal that would allow the RPF to rejoin the Rwandan political system, merge their army with the Rwandan army, and pretty much open up the space for multiple political party system. But as this was happening, the most extremist people in the Rwandan regime at the time were working on a complete different approach, a complete different project. There were Hutu extremist people in the government who could not accept to cohabit or to work with Tutsis as they were seeing it, and they set out to plan for a genocide, which they believed would be the right solution for them to hold on power, because they believed Tutsis were very few, and if they could annihilate those who remain in country, it would definitely kill the political reason or the political demands of the RPF. If there were no Tutsis remained in the country, this Hutu extremists believed that yeah, it would definitely kill the reason why RPF was fighting for and was in existence. So this genocide plan went on pretty much in open. They didn't hide it. They started by mobilizing the population through political events, political meetings that took place in the public domain. They were using all sorts of hatred language that had begun in 1959 when Tutsis were called cockroaches, snakes, when they were saying how they are liars, they you know, all sorts of things. So during this time of 92 to 94, this was done through media publication, for example. So they created newspapers that would, you know, write only bad things about Tutsis. In 1993, they established a radio called RTLM that was particularly broadcasting hate against Tutsis. And in 1994, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, in 1994, on the evening of April 6, President Juvenal Habyarimana of Rwanda and President Cyprien Ntaryamira of Burundi were killed when their plane was shot down as it approached Kigali Airport from a region head of state summit that had taken place in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. This summit was pretty much the last of many meetings that had taken place in the previous month to try and put in place this peace deal that had already been signed, but had all been delayed on a number of occasions, mainly because of the struggle that the ruling power, the ruling political power had. They had a division between themselves because there were a group of most extremist Hutu people who didn't want to see that deal being signed, and there were some moderate who wanted that to be signed. But this summit, which was for the head of state in the region, had basically forced the Rwandan president at the time to make sure that that peace deal was going to be implemented without any delay. So he had signed and agreed with his colleagues that he was coming back to Rwanda to make sure that the implementation of the peace deal was going to be in place. So as he was returning home, that's when his plane was shot down, just when it was about to land at the international airport in Kigali. As soon as the shooting down of the plane happened, the national radio and the RTLM radios blamed the RPF, and the forces controlled by the government began killing people, particularly killing the most influential people in the country. And at the time, it didn't matter if you were Hutu or Tutsi, as long as they knew that you were influential and you were more likely to stand in their way. Those were the first targeted people. Basically, in the next few hours, the plane was shot down around 8:30 p.m. Kigali time, and by 9 o'clock, the first people had already been killed. So they eliminated these head figures. It's also important to note that during that peace negotiation, they had already agreed to put in place a pre-deal negotiation. So they had already put in place a temporary transitional government that didn't have the RPF people, but had other opposition people inside the country. And the government at the time was managed by a prime minister, a lady called Uwiringiyimana Agathe, and she was considered as a moderate Hutu person. And then there were a few other Hutu who were in that government, but the president remained Habyarimana and his inner cycle. They controlled the army. They were in different other positions. The transition government was just there as a symbolic thing. It was not really doing much. So on the April 7th, the next morning, after the shooting down of the president's airplane, Prime Minister Agathe was attacked by a group of Rwandan government soldiers, and she was killed alongside her husband. And 10 Belgian peacekeepers, soldiers who were guarding her. It's also important to mention that during that peace negotiation, the UN had agreed to send 2,500 peacekeepers in Rwanda to help the transition and to help that process of putting in place this peace deal. And so when the Prime Minister Agathe was killed, together with 10 Belgian soldiers, Belgium decided to withdraw its contingent, which was a part of that peacekeeping mission that UN had sent in Rwanda. And because they were the biggest and they were the best equipped, well, once they decided to pull out, the UN decided to cancel the whole thing. So as the genocide was pretty much happening, the UN decided to pack and pretty much run away. And this obviously was part of the tactic that those who killed the 10 Belgian soldiers had. They knew if they would do that, then the response would be what the UN did. And this opened up, everything for them to go on and then kill people unhindered for the next 100 days. So in the evening of on the 7th of April 1994, a group of soldiers came into my flat where I was staying with another friend of mine. Tutsis, homes, work-off places, schools had been identified. People knew where Tutsi people lived, where they worked, which school they went to, and they had established lists of how to get to them. So these soldiers who came to my flat, they knew who were living there, and they were coming to kill us basically. So they forced their way in the house and then throw things up and down, and then pretending to be searching for weapons that they said we had. But as they were coming in, and we were just saying we are just sports people. We have nothing to do with politics. We don't have any weapon. We don't belong to any political party. But they were not listening, obviously. As they were throwing things up and down, something strange happened. One of the things they threw up and down, it happened to be a photo album. And this photo album landed wide open in front of one of the soldiers who was standing over us. And it caught the attention of this soldier. And he picked the album and looked at the photos, and then he turned and looked at me where I was sitting down, and then he asked me, "Are you Toto?" And I said, yes, I am. So Toto is a Kiswahili or Swahili word meaning the young one. When I was growing up, my father was a huge football fan and he supported a club called the LESSONSFROMRWANDA, which was and still the biggest football club in the country. So I grew up supporting this club, and at one point, my family relocated from where we came from in the east part of the country, and went to the capital city. And when we arrived there, I found out that this club that I had, grown up supporting was training not far from my parents' house. So I started going to their football ground to just see football players training and then admiring them, and it was a huge thing for me to be that close to them. So I started pretty much. I gave myself a role on their training ground, and I became what is known as a ball boy. So I would stand behind the goal and always bring back the balls that would be kicked, behind the goal. Because no one knew who I was, whenever someone wanted to say something to me or ask me to go and get the ball, they will call me Toto, which means the young one. Toto, go and do that. Toto, can you bring that ball? So as my time with the team became very close relationship between myself and the team, and within a few years, I had also discovered that I had talent for goalkeeping, and I became part of the team by the age of 14, and by the age of 16, I was a member of the first team of Rayon Sport. But that name stuck. People continue to call me Toto, even though I was now, one of the boys. So in 1994, I had been playing for the club for about, I think, 3 or 4 years. And I had become one of the most loved, and important players for the club. Everyone knew me. So this is how the soldier discovered who I was, even though he didn't know who I was when he came into my house. Basically, because he was a soldier, he must have been instructed by his superiors, go to this house. There are some enemies, enemies of the state, kill them, or But once he found out who I was, he completely changed. So he asked me to stand up and sat me on the sofa there were about 6 of them in that house when they came in. He, for the next 10 or so minutes, all he wanted to talk about was football. He completely forgot that he had come to, eliminate an enemy of state, as we were called at the time. We sat and talked about football. 2 weeks or 3 weeks earlier, my club had been involved in a very important football match where we eliminated a club from another African country called Sudan, and the game took place during a period where Rwandans had completely broken up. The Tutsis, Hutus, those who belonged to this political party, those who came from this side of the country, were no longer seeing each other as Rwandans. People had been regrouped in different groups that made them feel belonging to somehow. But when this football match happened, it completely changed the mood of the country. Though in a few hours, it happened. For the next 20 or 2-3 days, Rwandans somehow completely forgot what had been dividing them. So this soldier wanted to talk about that football match because apparently he had attended it. So he was talking, do you remember the goal Sarge scored? Do you remember the dribble, the tackle, the save happened? So it was crazy to be in that moment because minutes earlier, this man looked like a killer. And then during this conversation, he looked like a complete normal person. That moment became the first thing that spared my life, thanks to the power of sport and football. He decided to leave us alone. He told his colleagues to step out of the house, and he even gave us some advice of what to do next to try and keep the attention of some of his colleagues who might be passing by, keep the attention away. So things like opening the curtains wide open, leaving the gate of the compound open, and so and it worked because the next few hours nothing happened. So I stayed there. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I stayed there for the next few hours, and then the following morning I decided to leave, and I went to my parents' house, which was not far from where I was living, and wanted to check on them. I found out that they were still alive, shaken, but still alive. And then I decided to go and stay with my teammates. So my teammates, who lived 2-3 doors away from my parents' house, 3 of them were Hutus and 1 of them was a Tutsi. And at that time, the government or the people in charge at the time had been calling on all Hutus to treat Tutsis as their enemies, regardless of any other relationship they had. They were encouraged to just look at Tutsis as their enemies and to get rid of them before Tutsis get rid, before Tutsis come and then kill Hutus. So for me, going to my teammates' house who were Hutus, it was not an easy decision, but somehow I thought I should do it, and it turned out to be possibly the best decision I've ever made in my life, because my teammates went out of their way to really help me for the next 2 or 3 weeks. They went out. They went out to look for information. They went out to find food. They, at some point when things went out of control, they even stepped in and then paid their money, their own money, to release me from the hands of militia who wanted to take me away. Again, that camaraderie, that bond we had developed playing football together became a key part in how I was able to survive those 2 or 3 weeks I spent with them. At one point, things were becoming very hard to deal with, and they advised me to go and seek refuge to another guy who was much more influential and who lived not far from where we were at the time, and who he was also a very big fan of my football club. So this gentleman, his name is Jean-Marie Vianney. He was a big football fan of our club, but he was also the leader of the militia group, which was pretty much carrying the genocide over. But we had no choice. We had to go. I had to go and see if he can help me possibly to live for another day. So we went with my teammates. They accompanied me there, and to our surprise, Jean-Marie Vianney, who was also known as Zuzu, he agreed to take me in. I stayed I stayed in his house for another week or so. He would leave in the morning and go and do whatever that he was doing, and then come back in the evening. At one point, he came and asked me to tell him where he could take me, because he was planning to go away for some time, and he was not going to leave me alone for that much time. So we agreed that he would take me to International Red Cross headquarters, which was in downtown. And one morning, he, we jumped in his car, and with his escorts, people who had guns, and we drove from the neighborhood to International Red Cross headquarters. This place was about, in a normal time, it would be something like 25 minutes. But at that time, people would take, the lucky ones, it would take them possibly a day or two to travel that distance, because of how impossible the journey was at the time. Every corner of the city, every street had a roadblock, and the roadblock were there particularly to look for Tutsis. That identity card, which Belgium gave us in 1932, was a key part of how people were being identified. And the roadblocks were there to look for those identity cards. If you would come with an identity card showing that you are Tutsi, they didn't want to know anything else, automatically that was a death sentence. And then you'll be put on site, hacked to death, cut, or if you were lucky, shot to death, because being killed by a gunshot was a privilege at the time. That's how bad things were. So on this slide that we're looking at, these are French soldiers who came to Rwanda, or who were in Rwanda at that time. France had become very close to the Habyarimana regime, and they basically allowed the genocide to happen and to be as bad as it turned out to be, because they purposely protected these people who were clearly committing genocide, and they sent their own army to fight alongside them, to train the militia, to train the army. France used its international influence to delay, to influence the decisions that were made at the UN level. For example, it took almost a month or so for the UN to recognize that a genocide was happening in the country. So they play a fundamental role in allowing the genocide to happen the way it happened. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. I left the international headquarter, International Red Code headquarter, having been taken there by that gentleman. I left that place, I think 2-3 days after I arrived there, and was taken to another place called Hotel Mille Collines. Mille Collines Hotel is a hotel that came to be very much known in the story of genocide in Rwanda, because of a movie that was made by Hollywood, a movie called Hotel Rwanda. So the Hotel Rwanda movie was pretty much made out of the story from that hotel. So I was taken to that hotel by the help I received from the head of Red Cross, International Red Cross in Rwanda. And I found more than 1,200 people who had also managed to flee into that hotel. Stayed there for a couple of days, or weeks, sorry, I think 2 to 3 weeks. And eventually we were evacuated to the other side of the city, which had already been captured by the RPF. So once the president plane was shot down and he was killed, and then the killing started, the fighting resumed between the RPF and then the Rwandan government army of that time. So the RPF started fighting to stop the Tutsis and other people being killed, but in the process they managed to capture a big part of the country and a big part of the capital city, hence how we were managed to be transported to that area by a small group of UN peacekeepers who had remained in the country, because the head of that peacekeeping mission was a Canadian general called General Dallaire. Once the UN decided to cancel his mission, he himself refused to go. He decided to stay behind with a very small group of soldiers, mainly from African countries, who was part of that peacekeeping mission. So there were about 270. And then some of them were stationed at that hotel, and others were in few other places in the city of Kigali. So this particular small group of soldiers, they were the ones who managed to broker a deal between the Rwandan government at the time and the RPF, which allowed people who were staying in the Mille Collines to be transported to the RPF controlled site in the capital city. So that's pretty much how my journey of survival happened. But though I always call myself one of the luckiest survivors, because eight out of 10 survivors have lost more than 90% of their family members. And the closest, when I say family members, it's their parents, their siblings. So the majority of survivors in Rwanda today, you find that in a family of 80 people, you have 2 people who survived. That's how bad people were affected. For me, I was lucky because most of my direct family members survived. My parents survived. My 4 siblings survived. However, I lost the youngest member of my family, a young brother who was only 7 years old at the time. We lost him. And I also lost more than 85 extended family members, uncles, aunties, cousins, nieces, nephews. So that's how bad genocide was, and then that's how bad genocide affected me personally. So the genocide ended in July 1994 when the RPF managed to took control of the whole country. So they captured the whole capital city on July 4th, 1994, forcing the genocide regime out of power and out of country. So after that, they tried and put together a system that would help the country to reorganize and rebuild itself. But it was a very, very tough process. Over 1 million people had just been killed in 100 days. And the way which people were killed was that people were killed everywhere and anywhere. There were people who killed in their own homes. There were those who killed on the street when they were trying to flee. There were those who killed in the churches or other public places where they had tried to flee to. So you had a country full of bodies everywhere after the end of genocide. And again, the genocide regime, which committed the genocide in the name of the Hutus, they had also managed to mobilize quite a big number of Hutus who got involved in a genocide, either by killing themselves or giving out their neighbors or their associate in one way or another. When this regime lost power, they also set out to take a big chunk of population with them as they were fleeing. So more than 3 million people, majority Hutus, fled the country in July 1994, and went into neighboring countries. and this also created another complete a different problem. So you have a country that is completely terrorized and moralized because of the genocide that has just happened. And then you had more than 3 million people who have fled the country and are now living in the neighboring countries. So this created a very challenging situation for the new government. And those who took the people hostages, they did it because they wanted to use them as a shield, but they also wanted to use them in their next stage, in their next plan, which was to reorganize and come back and finish what they had not finished, as they were calling it. So in 1996, they reorganized themselves and started attacking Rwanda from refugee camps in Congo. And this created another war that went on for another year or so. And the majority of people in those camps that were used as a military base at the time suffered big time, because the war went straight into their camps, and so many of them were killed, either because of the war, or because of hunger, or because of disease that happened. So you can imagine having camps over 3 million people. It's an impossible situation. But somehow the new government managed to bring back the majority of refugees in the country, and then they also managed to fought the insurgent that was trying to destabilize the country, and the war ended, and then Rwanda pretty much started a new phase of rebuilding and reconstructing. Can we go to the next slide, please? So Rwanda, for the last 28 years, Rwanda has been going through a process of reconstruction and reconciliation. The new government, the first thing they set out to do was to try and bring back this idea of being Rwandans first and foremost, before being Tutsis or Hutus or Twa. They abolished the identity card that Belgium left us with, and they also encouraged people to reconcile. They came up with homemade solutions. For example, the way they manage the justice process was something that many people being asked in the country, or those who are outside Rwanda, find it very challenging when it was first introduced. They had something called gachacha courts. Gachacha courts is a system that you would call restoration justice system. And this gachacha court, on this slide, the picture on the left, on the right side, on the top right side, is how it used to take place. People will meet in an open field and sit down and basically discuss matters concerning genocide. Those who had been arrested, they will be brought up to that place and ask questions. The purpose of that was to encourage the perpetrators to tell the truth, to say what happened, and then encourage the victims to forgive the perpetrators. When this was introduced, it was very, very hard on survivors community, because you know, we couldn't understand why we are being asked to forgive people who had caused that much pain to us. But it became the pillar of what Rwanda has gone on to be in the last 28 years, because it helped. It gave a chance to perpetrators to come out and seek that forgiveness and show that remorse, provide information that was very, very important for survivors, because most of survivors didn't know where their loved ones were killed, where they were dumped. Through this discussion, information were collected, people were able to go and resume the bodies of their loved ones, and then gave them decent burial, and that brought closure and open up the process of healing, and this helped Rwanda basically to be where it is today. It's been 28 years. We've never had a repeat of community problems as we had in '94. Rwanda has gone on to become a very peaceful country, very stable country, very developed country. Everything was completely destroyed in '94. But today Rwanda is known as one of the cleanest and safest country on the African continent. Today Rwanda is known to have a political system that put women at the top of everything, because women became a very important part of Rwandan reconciliation and reconstruction process. Why? Because most of men had either been killed or been in jail or fled the country. And after the genocide, we had more women in the country from either victim side or perpetrator side. And these women had to step up and play the roles that they didn't play prior genocide. And this opened up a different way of understanding the role of women in a society or in Rwandan society. So today, Rwanda is #1 country in the world with the highest female representative in the parliament, for example. And this is a result of what happened after genocide. Today, the Rwandan constitution obliged that every high-end, every senior management level, from the government to the lower community level, the women percentage has to be, it has to be at least 30% of the leaders at all level. So, for example, the government has, I think, 50-something% of cabinet members, people in the private sector or other or government sector have to have leaders from women who are women. Culturally, women were not allowed to inherit, their families' wealth. today, the Rwandan constitution have changed that. Women and girls and boys, or women and men, have equal right when it comes to that. So this is the right things that have really happened at the back of the terrible genocide experience we've had. Rwanda is now the fifth peacekeeping contributor in the world. We are a very small country. We are not a very rich country, but the fact that we are the fifth peacekeepers contributor in the world, this also is another lesson that came from our sad and tragic experience. We've seen how the world abandoned us in '94, and we've taken on this lesson. And then today, whenever we see there is a risk of having something similar to what happened to us, we sent out our soldiers to go and try and help restore that peace and stop what something similar happening to these people. So yeah, this is Rwanda today. This is how things have changed and moved in a positive way. Survivors and perpetrators have learned to live side by side again. If you want to see how reconciliation can really be possible, I think Rwanda is the place to go. As I said at the beginning, Hutus and Tutsis, they were never different people. They always share language, same language. They shared same culture and tradition. They believed in one God. They lived in the same villages. They were one people. There was no difference between Hutus and Tutsis other than what they were doing in everyday life. So when the genocide came and these two communities completely broke apart, after the genocide, they had to go back and live in the same villages, because there is no such a place where Hutus lived in numbers, or Hutus lived in numbers than the other group in Rwanda. Today, Rwanda has managed to create that space where these two groups cohabit in a peaceful way. And this is how I have tried to contribute to that process by establishing my charity, Ishami Foundation, which is a charity that uses the power of sport and storytelling, basically to try and promote equality, diversity, and lasting peace, and to teach young people to become engaged and responsible citizens, respect for each other's differences. If by doing that, we hope the next generation of Rwandans will not have to go back to what my parents and myself have suffered from in the past. So yeah, this is who we are. This is what we do, and this is what we call the lessons from Rwanda. And I hope this will help you to go to learn and understand more about this history, and then why we need to learn from each other's history to be able to contribute to a better world. To conclude, I want to highlight one particular thing. Genocide has different stages, and the last stage is known as denial. The 10th stage of genocide is denial. And unfortunately, in recent years, Rwanda has been going through a problem of people trying to distort or try to deny what happened. And one of the ways that they do that is about terminology. Most people knows that what happened in Rwanda is something called Rwandan genocide. Unfortunately, in recent years, as people have tried to use that wrong terminology to distort or to deny or to confuse people. When you say Rwandan genocide, those who don't want to accept the responsibility of what happened, they put it as something that did affect one particular group of Rwandans. They said it was a genocide that affected all Rwandans. It's true, it affected all Rwandans, but there was a particular target group, and the target group were Tutsis. So those who try to run away from that, they do it because they know by doing that, it lessened their responsibility in it. So in 2018, the Rwandan government, the Survivors Representative Association, and the UN decided to change the name of how people have come to know about what happened in Rwanda, from Rwandan genocide to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. So specifically to try and avoid this ambiguity of when you say Rwandan genocide, and those who want to hide behind it, they use it as saying this genocide didn't affect Tutsis only, it affected all Rwandans. And then for a genocide to be a genocide, there has to be a specific target group. And so yeah, I wanted to highlight this because when you leave this talk and then want to discuss with whoever that you might be able to discuss, please avoid to use Rwandan genocide, and please use the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, because that's the right way to keep the historical fact correct. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to take on any questions if you have any.